All right, we are back after a relatively short hiatus. And the reason I've come back is because a card recently became legal in the budget format that has me very excited. That card actually makes an appearance in this game quite late in the game, but I'll just spoil it for you right now. The card is Kefnet the Mindful, the new blue god that's indestructible, that cannot attack unless you have a hand size of 7 or greater, and has the ability to draw a card for 4 mana over and over again, and then afterward you have the optional ability to bounce a land back to your hand. It's a card that I was super excited when it was initially spoiled. I hadn't tried it out in my non-budget Nin deck, mainly because it's just really hard to squeeze any cards into that deck because it's so tight, and I wasn't sure it would find a rightful place in there. But that is not the case for budget, where I have a lot of superfluous 3-mana spells that are kind of all on the bubble at the same time. And for me, it was an obvious switch. I think the card that I removed for it in my budget deck was Commander's Sphere, which is kind of a mediocre effect. I'm not really a big fan of 3-mana artifacts that don't make more than 1 mana, which is exactly what Commander's Sphere does. Certainly the Worn Power Stone and as well as Coalition Relic make more than 1 mana. But I think that the only justifiable 3-mana artifact that you might want to play outside of something more niche like Basalt Monolith is probably the Chromatic Lantern, and that's only in a deck like Breya where you're really, really color hungry, running cards like Cryptic Command and Necropotence in the same deck. But in the budget Nin deck, it didn't really make a lot of sense given the fact that you don't really have anything that costs double red except for Inferno Titan, and there's not really a lot of use for the red mana. So you're basically just playing with a glorified 3-mana mana rock that just produces blue, which is kind of terrible and probably not worth using. So it was an easy switch for Kefnet. And this game is amazing. I'm up against this guy, Kiki Wiki Jiki. I don't know if I've played him before, although he did recognize my name and the YouTube channel. So I was hoping that he and I would have a good game, and it did not disappoint. He is running this guy, Ezuri Renegade Leader, which I have actually had problems with in the past playing Nin, mainly because of the fact that they play an Elf Swarm, and if Ezuri gets out, most of your ability to interact with their creatures and kill them is through direct damage, and an untapped Ezuri, or I should say an Ezuri with a bunch of untapped green mana, means you can't really kill their creatures in a meaningful way, and often you'll have the ability to come back with a Cyclonic Rift mid-game, but of course that card is not accessible in budget because it's over the $2 threshold, which is generally the standard that I'm using for most of the cards in this deck, although I am running Sol Ring, which is right on the threshold, is often under $2, but is just sort of de facto banned from the format. And I'm only running that as a kind of an equalizer and to have a better thing to fetch with my Trinket Mage. And I'm also running a copy of Rolling Earthquake in lieu of a different red sweeper like Fault Line, which I think I'm either running Magma Quake or Fault Line in my regular budget version instead of Rolling Earthquake, because Rolling Earthquake, even the reprinted from the Vault's Annihilation version, is still well over $2. But I'm just using it because it's such an important tool to have for playing online, and there's no way to get people to necessarily agree, because even the budget decks online are not adhering to the 2DH variant of it, where every card has to be $2 or less on MTG stocks. A lot of people are running budget decks, but they're an aggregate value of $30 or 30 tickets or something, which is actually substantially higher than the cost of this deck. I think this entire deck is probably less than 10, would be my guess. It's a little more expensive. It's obviously more expensive in paper. There's a lot of cards that are between $1 and $2 in paper. Probably puts it closer to I'd say it's probably like $100 to $125 for the deck in paper, but things are much cheaper online, so it's way cheaper there, and it's definitely a budget deck online, even with Sol Ring and Rolling Earthquake. Anyway, I'm going to get to the game. I am, I think, going first, and I have a very, very good example of a hand that would be completely unkeepable in the 1v1 Commander format online due to the fact that both Preordain and Brainstorm are banned. But this is the kind of hand that you can absolutely keep, despite the fact that it has only 1 mana source in it. Because between Preordain and Brainstorm, I'm going to look 6 cards down, potentially, and if I don't have any lands in those top 6 cards, then, it was never meant to be regardless. And very likely I'll have 2 to 3 land, and I can muddle the mixture to get an impulse or something if I need to, and I've got defense and pretty much everything that I need. So this is actually a very, very good hand, despite the fact that it has only 1 island, so I certainly keep it. It also has Muddle the Mixture for Fire Ice, which is a really powerful tool to have against Ezuri. And unfortunately, I'm not running the Magma Quake again or Fault Line, which are both RR and X sweepers, which are fetchable with Muddle. So that's actually one way that Rolling Earthquake can be worse, because you can't fetch it with Muddle. But I think that the card itself is powerful enough that it offsets that, especially when you're playing against non-budget decks, where people often have Planeswalkers that you want to kill. Although I guess Magma Quake is really good at that. Okay, so I just play an island first, and I'm going to certainly going to preordain over brainstorming, given the fact that I have very few reshuffle effects in the deck because I'm not using fetch lands, and with the exception of the extremely bad ones that only get basic land, the Terramorphic Expanse and the other one that's just like it. So I'm going to preordain, and on top I get Miscalc and Is It Guildgate. And I've already got a Mana Leak in my hand, even though I could cycle Miscalculation. What I really want to actually do here is I want to hit an untapped land next turn to either play Nin, or depending on what he does, have Mana Leak available to stop Ezuri. So because of that, I can't actually keep the Miscalculation because I need to maximize my chances of drawing an untapped land. So I'm going to put the Miscalc on the bottom, draw the Is It Guildgate, and then hope to get another land on my next turn. An untapped land, of course. Alright, I'm just hoping he doesn't play Soul Ring, Bird of Paradise, or any one of the 8 different elves that he can play on turn 1 that make mana. And he taps 1 green and then casts Worldly Tutor main step, which is a little strange to me. I'm not really sure why he would do this, other than the fact that I guess he's worried about permission, but then I could just counter what he plays since he can't draw it. So that's just sort of a strange play to me. Certainly telegraphs a lot of information, and I knew exactly what he would probably be fetching as soon as he cast the card, and sure enough, he did not disappoint, fetching Priest of Titania. Alright. It's kind of interesting, actually, that I am crossing my fingers that this replay will actually function. When I first reviewed this game after I played it, I was heartbroken to find that, in fact, the replay bugged about 7-8 turns in. But I was so despondent about that and thought, well, maybe I can step through it in a different manner to get it to actually work. And to my great surprise and joy, I discovered that if I jumped ahead turns automatically using this function, it actually got me past the point where the bug occurred, and I was able to actually draw the correct cards and resume the replay, stepping through 1 turn at a time. So I'm going to be trying to do that a little bit later on to bypass the issue. And so you'll forgive me when I jump ahead a couple turns at one point. I've actually pretty much figured out exactly where that needs to occur, hopefully to avoid the problem. And you'll know because I'll get Kefnet in my hand. That's the right card. If the replay bugs, it'll be a Void Shatter instead. And, of course, the replay won't function from that point onward. But anyway, off the top of the deck here, unfortunately, I do not draw a basic land. I draw Impulse. So I'm just going to brainstorm, see what the deck yields. Maybe I can get a basic land and a Soul Ring or something. And I get Kerkeep, Star Compass, and Command Tower. So given the fact that I have nothing else to play here, I'm just going to play the Is It Guildgate and be sad when he casts that Priest of Titania, which I would love to have been able to kill. On the bright side, I do have Impulse, and one thing that the Nin deck does have, this budget version has, that makes it better in some ways than my non-budget Nin deck, is it has a lot more red removal. I run both Earthquake and Rolling Earthquake. I'm also running Flame Slash. I have Fire Ice. It just has a few more red burn spells to deal with small creatures, and that can often make a really big difference against a Elf Swarm, which gives my other Nin deck a lot of problems. So certainly it's going to cast Priest of Titania. That would have been amazing to get Days off the Brainstorm, but unfortunately that doesn't happen. Alright, not the end of the world. At least I still can defend with Mana Leak, and then awesomely I draw Dissipate off the top, so that's awesome. I'm just going to sit here and do nothing. And my intention actually is to get this Dissipate out of my hand, pretty much countering whatever he plays next turn, because 3-mana counters are really clunky against elves, and I'd much rather use the sleek efficiency of Mana Leak, especially because next turn I intend to play the Star Compass or potentially Nin the Pain Artist. And I did give some thought to actually playing Nin here, and the reason why I didn't do it, I could play Nin and threaten to shoot Priest of Titania, but if he has just one more land, and I have to assume that he does, he plays a 3rd land and he taps 3 land and he casts Ezuri, and now Priest of Titania taps for 2 green, which means that he can double regenerate. He can use Ezuri to double regenerate his Priest of Titania if I try to shoot it with Nin, and he'll just wind up drawing cards and I won't kill it. So that's not really a reliable game plan, and I can't really play Nin. I just rather would defend with Dissipate and hope I can keep his board relatively clear of elves so that the Priest doesn't get out of control. It's just such a powerhouse for 2 mana. Sure enough, he did have a 3rd land, so I was correct to avoid getting punished there. And then he casts Fauna Shaman, and this, of course, only costs 1 mana because of the Priest of Titania. So this is a perfect card to Dissipate. I don't want to deal with what he could be fetching. Who knows what's in his deck. And then I get absolutely punished with the follow-up, which is Winnow Orb. And that is gnarly as hell. And I was a little bit on the fence about dissipating the Fauna Shaman. Other than the fact that it makes 2 mana, it's not really that threatening, I guess, when I have multiple counters and he's down to just 2 cards in hand. But Winnow Orb is going to really make this game tough because I have nothing in my hand that can remove it right now, although this deck does run quite a bit more artifact removal than Nin does. In fact, one of the tools that my non-budget Nin deck uses to fight against artifacts in general is Dak Faden, and of course that does not work against Winnow Orb, so that's just one less out. I have Bi-Force, I have Vandal Blast, and I may have one more artifact removal spell too. But none of them are in hand, unfortunately. And then I draw a Muddle the Mixture. Oh, I have a Braid, that's right. But a Braid is also in the other Nin deck too. But Muddle at least gives me an option to deal with the Winnow Orb down the road by tutoring for an Abrade. Although, of course, the Winnow Orb taps him out too, and if I can keep most of his elves out of play, then the Orb is going to hurt him just as badly as it does me. Plus, it shuts down Ezuri's main ability, which is, of course, the Trample Overrun ability, which can kill you very, very quickly. And it's hard to use a 5-mana activated creature ability if you have Winnow Orb in play. So that's actually, it may rein him in for a while. I may not ultimately even have to deal with the Winnow Orb if I'm able to work my way around it. And one component of that is getting Star Compass out, so I'm going to do that. All right. Just need him to not have any cheaper elves here. So it goes back to his turn. He thinks for a little while, and then he just attacks me with the Priest. I'm not sure what he was thinking about casting, but obviously he couldn't. So he's already hurt by the Orb, and it set him back a turn. It's kind of nice. I'm just going to untap the Command Tower, and I draw a Phyrexian Processor. Normally I'm very, very happy to see that card, especially against a green deck with only a few cards left in hand who clearly doesn't have artifact removal. But unfortunately, this card is next to useless against Winnow Orb, so I'm just going to have to say done. And my intention is to pretty much mana leak whatever he plays, because it's most likely going to be an elf, and it's going to make the Priest of Titania better. So I'm just going to play the tempo game here against this Orb. And he plays Farhaven Elf, so this thing is basically like him playing a 3-mana Soul Ring, because it's going to buff up the Priest of Titania, and it's going to get him a forest. And those two things can't happen, so that's a perfect mana leak target. And he just says done again. So he's still kind of stuck under the Orb. We're actually kind of in parity here, although I have one extra land and one extra card in hand. It's really not too bad right now, but it could get really, really ugly if he draws into some more elves that I'm not able to stop. But my game plan right now is I need an opening here to use Muddle the Mixture to transmute to get Fire Ice, to get rid of this Priest of Titania. The other option would be to just deploy Nin and use Nin to shoot down Priest of Titania in a turn. I draw an island, so that's conducive to that plan. And then I make this totally boneheaded play. I'm not really sure what the hell's going on here. I think that certainly casting Nin, there's an argument for doing that, because Muddle the Mixture gives me the ability to tutor for a Braid, which can kill the Winnow Orb permanently and deal with the problem. But the thing is, as I said before, if I can manage to kill off Priest of Titania, then the Winnow Orb is really not that dangerous, given the fact that it's going to hurt him just as badly as it hurts me. Nin is a way to kill the Priest without using a card, but if I'm going to play Nin, why the hell did I not tap Star Compass? And when I watched the replay of this, I couldn't believe that I did this. It was just kind of baffling to me. And I think that for whatever reason, my brain was just stuck in the mindset that the Star Compass was only making colorless mana and that I couldn't use it to cast Nin. That had to have been what I was thinking, but generally it pays to know what your own cards do. I think that actually can help you win in Magic. Just a little word of advice from a veteran player here. But regardless, I have an untapped Star Compass under Winnow Orb, and I feel stupid. Because now, unless I top deck another land, I can't even use Nin the Pain Artist to shoot something, which is extremely painful. So he untaps one force, and he casts Draga Warcaller without Kicker. But then that gives him the ability to get 2 mana out of his Priest of Titania, and he has Wirewood Symbiote. And the Wirewood Symbiote, and then he plays a Skull Clamp, and then, yeah, I guess he had the option here to untap, use the Wirewood Symbiote, bouncing Draga Warcaller, untapping the Priest of Titania, and then tapping the Priest of Titania, I guess that wouldn't have really done all that much. I suppose that's why he didn't do it. But the Wirewood Symbiote, unfortunately, now protects Priest of Titania from my Nin, which is, I missed my opening there, which is really unfortunate, because if I had a Fire Ice in my hand that I had just transmuted for, I could just go pop, pop, kill both these two, he'd untap one land, and he'd be really, really stuck. This thing would be dead, and he'd have no ability to use his Priest, and I'd be in a lot better shape. But unfortunately, I didn't do that, and now I have to just sit here on my Spell Pierce and feel bad. Bad mistake there, I think, and one that could actually be very decisive, because now he's got Wirewood Symbiote plus a thing that taps for 2 green mana, and that will allow him to not only replay the Warcaller and make it larger, but he's got the ability to double up on Priest of Titania to get 4 mana. So sure enough, he does that. Untaps the Priest, taps a forest, and he plays this guy with with one multi-kicker. And now the priest is out of reach of Nin. I just feel so dumb for that error. Really, really costly, and he attacks me for 2. Or, I'm not sure why he tapped this thing for 2 green mana. I think he meant to attack with it, but whatever. Probably would have behooved him to use the Skull Clamp and, I don't know, throw it on this guy or something. So, end of turn, I decide that I have to regain some tempo here because I'm really starting to fall behind, and I decide to enter the Royal his Winter Orb, given the fact that if I can get him to be a little reckless with it, cast something else, and then play Winter Orb afterward, I might be able to actually activate this Spell Pierce to stop the orb on the way out. And I'm rewarded for that play immediately when I top deck 1 Power Stone. Super awesome. I'm going to throw that out there. Now I've got 3 mana that operates under the Winter Orb. Feeling a little bit better. Unfortunately, I can't use my Nin to shoot down his priest, which of course I would have done. Probably would have done that during his upkeep, I suppose, if the priest had 1 toughness. Even with the Wirewood Symbiote in play, I probably would have still done it, just to slow his tempo to a crawl. But now he gets to untap all of his forests. He's got access to a lot of mana. He plays Ezuri, which unfortunately I can't stop. And now this thing taps for 3 plus the Symbiote's ability. It's just really nasty. So he taps for 3 green mana and used 2 of it to cast Nature's Lore. And I gave some thought to countering this, potentially with Muddle, potentially with Spell Pierce, just to slow him down. Granted, he would have had the mana to pay for it, but my hope again is that he gets a little bit greedy and then plays Winter Orb at the tail end of this, and I'm able to Spell Pierce it. So I'm going to let the Nature's Lore go, even though that means he gets another forest. And then he plays Winter Orb, and of course he's got this stupid Symbiote in play, which I can't get rid of. And that gives him the ability to untap his Priest of Titania to pay 3 if need be. But regardless, I decide I'm just going to play the Spell Pierce here anyway. That will at least force him to bounce one of these elves off the board, and it probably won't be Jiraga, because if it is Jiraga Treespeaker, then he won't have the ability, or Jiraga Warcaller, I'm sorry, the priest will shrink and fall into range of Nin the Pain Artist, and he won't have another elf necessarily or a good elf to bounce to untap with Wirewood Symbiote. So I'm going to Spell Pierce. Force him to do that right now. That's really slows him down, and of course he bounces the Ezuri back to his hand. And he pays the 2, which I pretty much expected, but I think that's well worth it. Okay, I really need to draw a solution to this dumb thing. I don't want to have to shoot it with Nin because of the amount of tempo that costs me. Alright, need to draw something good. Expedition Map. Not too useful, but at least that does fetch, well, it does fetch a 2-mana land, because I do have 5 land in play. So I decided to cast it after a little while. And the choices are pretty obvious. I need a 2-mana land. It's either Boilerworks or it's Temple of the False God. And as attractive as it Boilerworks is underneath a Winter Orb, it doesn't come into play untapped, which means that the 2 mana that it makes won't even be activated till next turn, which means I don't even gain any net mana, though I guess I bounce the island back to my hand. But I decided to go with the safer play of getting the Temple of the False God, even though it's not ideal because it doesn't make colored mana. In retrospect, maybe Boilerworks would have been better. That would have assured a land drop next turn. I would have had, I think, the same amount of mana the turn afterward. And then the fact that if you once the temple's been used a single time, it's no longer any benefit over the Boilerworks, and obviously doesn't make colored mana. And the colored mana issue does actually matter a little bit later in the game. Wasn't entirely sure about that. I thought about that play for a while. Alright, so we're back to his turn. He's still got access to too much mana. So he taps the priest again. Ezuri comes down. Now he's got green mana untapped to regenerate any elf that I might try to kill. And I'm actually starting to get in that position where elf creatures you control, 3 of them, where Ezuri can be activated trivially between Priest of Titania and Wirewood Symbiote. He can actually make enough mana to either multi-kick the hell out of this guy, or he can also just overrun me and deal tons of damage to me. So I finally draw a hard counter in the form of Counterflux, which is quite nice, although it has a clunky casting cost. I'm going to have to use Counterflux, hopefully, to take this Priest of Titania off the board, but that's a few turns away. My biggest priority is dealing with the Wirewood Symbiote, because it's making a ton of mana and it's protecting his whole board. So with that in mind, I decided to go fishing with Impulse to see what I might find, hoping to just find any type of burn spell. Ideally, I find a full board-sweeping burn spell that can kill off both Ezuri and the Wirewood Symbiote. But barring that, a singular one would be excellent too. So we'll see what the Impulse yields. I've got 1 floating. And awesomeness. All right, so Flame Slash and Flame Tongue Kavu on top, as well as that miscalculation making another visit. And there's definitely reasoning for getting Flame Slash. I can take down the Wirewood Symbiote with just that, and it leaves me some mana untapped. But I don't really have that big of a benefit to keeping my mana untapped. And if you look at the way that this works out, because I have a colorless floating, the Flame Tongue Kavu, because I got Temple of the False God and this red mana source right here, well, that's 4 mana, and that still leaves me with blue, blue, and red, which is enough to play the Counterflux in my hand. And the fact that the Flame Tongue Kavu gives me a potential Nin outlet that isn't Nin, as well as a 4/2 blocker, makes me decide that ultimately that's the better choice of the two. So I'm going to go with that, tap the Temple, and munch down the Symbiote and solve this nasty problem. Okay, so that really helps. Not only does it remove the automatic protection from his elves, but that's effectively removing 2 or 3 mana from his turn by killing his untapper. Very, very nice. And I still have the ability to defend with Counterflux. All right, we're approaching the bug turn, so it's going to be a test for the interface to see if I can get past it. All right, I remember on this turn, so he plays Sylvan Messenger, which is like that goblin thing where you look at the top. I think it's called War Leader or something, where you look at the top 4 cards. It's got Trample, and you reveal the top 4. So I could counter this, but ultimately it's just a 2/2, and it's tapped most of his mana. It does turn on his Priest even further, but I feel like I can't afford the Counterflux, because right now I just have to get Priestess Titania off the board at any cost. And Muddle, the Mixture, at least allows me to get potentially a way to bounce it or at least damage it to cause him to regenerate, and then I can kill it another way. So he reveals off the Sylvan Messenger. He gets, there's a Harbinger on top. There's Nature's Claim and Garruk, which are both nasty as hell cards I would not have wanted to deal with. Nature's Claim would have been backbreaking if he'd been able to kill my Worn Power Stone, but of course he just wouldn't have drawn. Could have just as easily not drawn either of those cards, but there's an Elvish Mystic on top as well. All right, so he thinks for a little while and just says done. Okay, so this is where I think after this turn is where I have to jump forward rapidly for 2 turns, and we'll know if it works if you see Kefnet the Mindful pop into my hand after a repulse. I draw Cold Steel Heart. That's a no-brainer to cast right now. And I'm going to name blue. And even though it's tempting to name red, given the fact that I've got already 5 blue mana sources in play, I figured double red is good enough for the deck. I only have the Inferno Titan as a double red thing, and I decided to get blue, figuring that a reusable source of blue mana is more useful. That might have been a mistake and actually does affect the game a little bit later. But wish me luck. We're going to jump forward at least 2 turns. So here we go. All right. Oh, did it work? Nope, it didn't. Game over.